Have you ever been absolutely convinced God told you to do something, and it turned into total confusion? You prayed, you felt peace for a moment, you sensed a genuine urgency in your spirit. Then months or maybe years later, you woke up and realized, that wasn't God. This graphic illustrates the two extremes most Christians are taught today regarding the voice of God. On one end of the spectrum, you have the belief of complete silence, the idea that God simply doesn't speak anymore. On the opposite end, you have the equally dangerous mandate of impulsive execution, the teaching that if you feel a spiritual impression strongly enough, you must obey it immediately without question. That second extreme has birthed an operating system that completely dominates modern charismatic circles. We can call it hear and run. The doctrine is simple: hear a voice, feel an emotion, and execute the action immediately. The real-world fallout from this operating system is devastating. We see believers rushing into impulsive marriages because of a supposed prophetic word. We see families uprooted for destructive ministry moves. We see people quitting stable jobs, chasing emotional decisions, and falling victim to manipulated spirituality, all because they felt a strong sensation and assumed it was heaven giving an order. Here is the truth we need to recover. Giftedness and passion, when operating without the boundaries of judgment, create spiritual chaos. A highly emotional, highly passionate believer, moving on every internal impulse, is not experiencing revival. They are spreading wildfire instead of holy fire. Confusing emotional intensity with divine accuracy leaves believers dangerously vulnerable. When you equate the volume of a feeling with the voice of God, you open the door to deep regret. Many believers are completely unprepared for a very uncomfortable reality. Satan speaks too. Not every spiritual thought that enters your mind is divine in origin. This diagram shows exactly how subtle deception bypasses our defenses. The enemy rarely starts with obvious evil. A suggestion labeled obvious evil gets blocked immediately. So the enemy tempts through alternative channels. He manipulates through thoughts disguised as logic and urgency. He weaponizes your own emotions to create a false sense of spiritual necessity. Look at the ultimate biblical case study. In this illustration of Jesus in the wilderness, pay attention to the timeline. Satan spoke his temptation after Jesus had completed 40 days of fasting, not before, after. Fasting does not prevent deception. Heightened spirituality does not grant automatic immunity. Hearing a voice in a spiritually charged atmosphere does not prove divine origin. The devil told Jesus, "Turn these stones into bread." That suggestion was perfectly logical. Jesus was starving. He had the supernatural power to do it. He was the Son of God, fully capable of providing for himself. The temptation was subtle. Feed yourself. Take control. If raw spiritual discipline and intense fasting did not stop the enemy from whispering to Jesus, modern believers are deeply arrogant to assume their own spirituality makes them safe from deceptive suggestions. But Jesus did not hear and run. Faced with a highly logical, deeply practical spiritual suggestion, he instituted a radical pause. He stopped to judge the thought. In John 5:30, Jesus lays out his operating system. I judge as I hear. Notice the priority. Modern believers emphasize I hear. Jesus emphasized, I judge. This chart compares the modern approach with the biblical model. Up top, we have the modern Christian default: hear an impulse, feel an emotion, and execute immediately. On the bottom is the chronological framework for biblical maturity: hear the impulse, test the origin, judge the righteousness, submit the will, and then execute. Before any movement happens, there is an active process of discernment. The testing, the judging, and the submitting of the human will must occur before a single step is taken. The Son of God himself refused to trust a spiritual impulse without testing it against a higher standard. That cements this process as the absolute non-negotiable standard for every believer walking the earth today. The Holy Spirit is not trying to create robotic believers who blindly react to every sensation. He is actively training sons and daughters capable of righteous, independent judgment. We have to stop treating the Holy Spirit like church furniture, acknowledging him in theory but ignoring him in practice. He is a tactical counselor given to guide daily, practical decisions. Real dependence requires asking, waiting, and actively consulting Him, not just feeling a rush during a worship song. And if you are terrified of making a mistake, listen closely. Even when you miss it while sincerely trying to obey God, the process of pausing to ask Him is training your will into submission. The effort of seeking His judgment aligns your heart with His. The writer of Hebrews tells us that mature believers are those who have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Discernment is not a sudden download. It is a muscle. It is developed through practice, humility, correction, and time. So how do we actually test these impulses? We use one specific metric, the righteousness filter. Look at this visual filtration funnel. Modern Christians usually evaluate decisions by asking selfish questions. Will this make me successful? Will this increase my platform? Does this excite me? But heaven asks a completely different question. A raw spiritual impulse must pass through this glowing barrier. Will this produce righteousness and please the Father? When you filter every thought, every emotion, and every prophecy through that single question, you immediately neutralize Satan's logical temptations. Feed yourself might make sense naturally, but it fails the test of pleasing the Father if it means stepping outside His timing. Here is your charge. The next time you feel a sudden spiritual urgency, a profound impression, or an intense emotion telling you to move, stop. Refuse to run. Stand your ground and actively judge the impulse. Ask yourself, will this please the Father? Choosing righteous discernment over emotional speed is the true mark of spiritual maturity. It is the antidote to the chaos infecting the modern church.